Hello and good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Aspen Institute's Mind, Body, Spirit series. I'm Gina Murdock. I'm the founder of Lead with Love, and together with my husband, Jerry. Say hi, Jerry. Not only are we happily married, which is a miracle and wonderful, he's a trustee at the Institute, and we've established and endowed this series to pay homage to the Aspen idea, which is a founding principle of the Aspen Institute. The Aspen idea is about nurturing the whole individual, the body, the mind, and the spirit. And I would always add to that love, always nurturing love. In this series, we host a diverse range of experts, innovators, and leaders on a variety of topics. Tonight, we're honored to feature Dr. Helen Fisher. Dr. Fisher is a biological anthropologist and a senior research fellow at the Kinsey Institute who claims, love is not just an emotion, it's a drive as powerful as hunger. Raise your hand if you believe it. Love. Yes, me too. She's a member of the Center for Human Evolutionary Studies at Rutgers, and the best news for all of you singles out there, I won't make you raise your hands, she's the chief scientific advisor at Match.com, so she'll tell you how to set up your profile for success. All kidding aside, she understands the trends we are seeing in our culture and will explain why she's optimistic and what we can all learn from millennials. There is something to learn, besides for how to take vacation. I'm kidding. I work with millennials, and I love them, and I do like to learn a lot from them. Dr. Fisher will be signing her best-selling book after her talk in the lobby. We're also very thrilled to have Alycin Bektesh from Aspen Daily News here to interview Dr. Fisher. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Helen Fisher and Alycin Bektesh.
I'm thrilled to be here speaking with Helen. Thank you so much for taking the time this evening. I also have a couple of questions for the audience before I turn to you. So it's a gorgeous day in Aspen, Colorado, and yet this room is full. It seems like there's a couple things we have to learn about love still. Before we begin, I'd like to see a show of hands. How many of you have been in love? Helen, did you raise your hand? Did you? Oh, okay.
My boyfriend.
Well, we're getting to that. How many of you are currently in love? How many of you are currently sitting next to someone you love? And I'm looking for twos here. I'm looking for no. We'll talk about why that's a little more of an uncomfortable question as we get on. Is anyone heartbroken out there? And you can choose to share that or not. Do we have anyone who just wants to come clean with that? No. Has anyone not raised their hand? Will you raise your hand? I just wanted everyone to get to play. Okay. We're going to focus on love. We're going to get to some sex, adultery, teenagers, and then audience questions. So I will leave time for that. I'm opening with a big spoiler alert, which is that biologically and neurologically speaking, it makes most sense for us humans to be serial monogamists, switching up our pair bonds, as you call them, every 3 to 4-ish years, which coincidentally is about the time it takes for a baby to go through the mill and become a toddler. And yet, more than anything, certainly here in this culture, we want one true everlasting love. We want that soulmate. Why? Why is that our goal?
I think it's because we're built to love. We're absolutely built to love. We pine for love, we live for love, we kill for love, and we die for love. It's one of the most powerful human brain systems that ever evolved. And I was just so interested in the introduction that, I and my colleagues have put over 100 people into a brain scanner and studied the brain circuitry of romantic love, and also feelings of deep attachment. And the basic brain circuitry lies, way below the cortex where you do your thinking, way below the limbic regions in the middle of your head, thread that orchestrate the emotions. Way down at the very base of the brain, in a tiny little factory that makes dopamine and sends that dopamine to many brain regions, giving that elation. But to answer your question, that little factory lies right next to the factory that orchestrates thirst and hunger. Thirst and hunger keep you alive today. Romantic love drives you to focus your mating energy on a particular individual and pass your DNA into tomorrow. This is why we love. We call it a survival mechanism. I mean, when you think about it, around the world, we got the poems, we've got songs, we've got myths, we've got legends, we've got ballets, we've got operas, we've got theater, we got books, we've got self-help, we've got magazines, we got holidays, we got, you name it. We are saturated in this basic human drive, and it's the drive to succeed.
I want to learn a little bit more about the research that you do. So you take someone who says they're in love, you put them in one of these fMRI machines, and then do you say their partner's name? Do you show them a photo? How do you turn on love?
Yeah, we studied a lot of this before we, it's very expensive to do this, and it's very time consuming, and you really got to find people who really are in love. So, yeah, then you're screwed if you're not, that's for sure. But, so I ask them a lot of questions first. I really interview them long term. We give them a lot of questionnaires, and then we tell them what to do in the machine. In fact, my colleagues didn't want me to tell them what was going to happen, but this is not about a surprise. This is studying a basic brain system, like the fear system, like the anger system. It's a basic brain system. So what the experiment is, they bring in 2 photographs, a photograph of their sweetheart, that every time they look at that photograph, they think of some wonderful time together. Not sex. You're not supposed to think about sex. That's a different brain system. And also a neutral photograph of somebody who, when you look at that photograph, it calls forth no positive or negative feelings. And so they lie in the machine. I make them very comfortable. I tell them I'll come get them if they panic, but thank God. Then I say, it'll ruin the experiment, so that keeps them in the machine. And I make them very comfortable. And they look at a photograph of their sweetheart for 30 seconds, and then they look at the neutral photograph. So it's positive, neutral, positive, neutral. The problem is that when you're madly in love with somebody, you can't stop thinking about them. So the feelings of the positive image will bleed into the neutral. So between looking at the positive image and the neutral image, we do what we call a distraction task. We put a large number on the screen. They're lying in this machine. There's a mirror so that their head's all in case. They can get out if they want to, but we put on a screen in front of their eyes a large number like 8,421. And they have to look at that number and count backwards in increments of 7. Nobody can do it. Nobody can do it.
So what's the correlation between being good at math and being in love?
But it drives all of the blood away from these very powerful brain regions into a brain region just for counting. And I don't even care if they get it right as long as they do their counting. So then what you have, you've got the brain scanned in 3 different ways. Looking at the beautiful partner, looking at the neutral, and counting back. And then you take the scans of the neutral and the positive, and you put them together, and you cancel out what they have in common, leaving the brain in love. Yeah.
So you do these experiments on men who are in love,
Absolutely.
women who are in love,
Yep.
gay couples, straight couples.
I haven't done, because we were the first in the world.
Okay.
And I wanted to do gay and straight because it's exactly the same brain system. I mean, at that point, I wasn't studying who you fall in love with. I was studying how you feel when you love.
Okay.
And gays fall in love just exactly the way straights do. And men fall in love faster than women do. They fall in love more often than women do. When a man meets a woman he really is in love with, he wants to introduce her to friends and family sooner. Men want to move in sooner. Men have more intimate conversations with their wives than women do with their husbands, because women have their intimate conversations with their girlfriends. And men are 2.5 times more likely to kill themselves when they've lost love. So I've been trying to tell the women's magazines for 40 years that men love. They're dedicated to thinking that's not true.
I just anticipate this question later, so just to reiterate, make sure that this was clear. When you put a man in the machine, when you put a woman in the machine, they think about their love. The exact same flashy parts of the brain are going off.
Absolutely. It's exactly the same brain regions. Men love a little harder. They fall in love faster. Exactly the same regions. Same thing with gay. This brain system evolved millions of years ago. I mean, as a matter of fact, when I did my first academic article on it, one of the peer reviewers said, "But you can't study love, Helen, because it's part of the supernatural." And I thought to myself, what do you mean? I mean, what, fear is part of the supernatural? Anxiety is part of the supernatural? Come on, get a break. It had to be a very profoundly basic. I thought it was an emotion. It never dawned on me that it would be so low in the brain that it would be a drive. That really came as a great surprise.
And you've actually identified 4 different neurosystems that affect personality, that affect, of course, this question of why do we love who we love? It's this chemistry, literally, concept of you meet someone and you match. So 2 of these systems, dopamine and serotonin, they like their own. They match with someone who is very much like them. The other 2, those who are stronger, showing testosterone and estrogen, they're puzzle pieces. They find a partner whose strengths are their weaknesses. They match together. But if you will, walk us through what you found of these 4 personality types, these 4 love personalities.
Great. Just backing up for a moment, I do think that we've evolved 3 distinctly different brain systems for mating and reproduction. Sex drive being one, feelings of intense romantic love being the second, and feelings of deep attachment being the third. And they can come in any way. They're not stages. They're brain systems. You can fall madly in love with somebody who you'll never have sex with. You can feel a deep attachment for somebody for many years, and then somebody dies, somebody changes their partners, whatever, and then you can move from attachment to romantic love. Or you can start with just the sex drive. So basically, I just wanted to round that one out. That
anyway. Question is coming, but we can stay on that
for
a moment because...
Well, anyway, the 4 styles of thinking and behaving.
Well, would you say that they affect mostly one of those 3 stages or all 3 of them?
All 3 of them.
Okay, so let's get to those in a moment. I would love to learn about the love personality types.
So this started, 14 years ago. Match.com came to me 2 days before Christmas in New York City. Nothing happens in New York City 2 days before Christmas. And they said, "Can we meet 2 days after Christmas?" I said, "Well, sure. Why not?" And I didn't know who these people were. They, like 11 of them, walked into this room, and I thought, is this a think tank? What are we? Anyway, bottom line is, in the middle of it, one of them, who ended up being the CEO, didn't know that at the time, but asked me, "Why do you fall in love with one person rather than another?" And I said, "I don't know. Nobody knows. We do know that you would tend to fall in love with somebody for the same socioeconomic background, same general level of intelligence, same general level of good looks, same religious and social values, same economic and reproductive goals, and your childhood always plays a role. But you can walk into a room and everybody's from your background and same level of intelligence and good looks, and you don't fall in love with all of them." So I began to think to myself, maybe basic biology pulls you naturally towards one person rather than another. So I decided what I would do is read, the last 40 years of biology and medical research, looking for any trait at all linked with any biological system. And I found 4 in the brain: the dopamine, serotonin, testosterone, and estrogen systems. And if you're very high on the dopamine scale, I call you an explorer. These people are risk-taking, novelty-seeking, curious, creative, spontaneous, energetic, mentally flexible people. And they're drawn to people like themselves. I created a questionnaire, by the way, that 14 million people have taken in 40 countries. And I'd like to actually have you take it tonight, but I'll explain that to you. I mean, you don't have to take it. I'll study you, of course, but...
How many of them matched each other?
What?
How many of the respondents matched other respondents? Is this the one where
I don't know. What do you mean?
Is this the one where 0 people came? No one matched anyone else, this survey.
Oh, you mean when they took the questionnaire? No 2 people answered the questionnaire exactly the same way. No 2 people. 14 million.
That's insane.
Yeah, but I'm an identical twin. And the 2 of us are not exactly alike. No 2 people are exactly alike. So anyway, people who are very active express a lot of the traits in the serotonin system. I call them builders. I don't like the term, but I'm stuck with it now because I got 14 million of these things. So, they're traditional, conventional, cautious. They follow the rules. They respect authority. They tend to be more religious, traditionally religious, not spiritual. They're concrete thinkers rather than theoretical thinkers. And they're drawn to people like themselves. a good example, just like the high dopamine, a good example would be Mitt Romney and his wife, or Mike Pence and his wife, or I even think George Washington, but I'm not quite sure about that anymore. And the third type is the very high testosterone. Analytical, logical, direct, decisive, tough-minded, skeptical, good at what we call rule-based systems, everything from math to engineering to computers to music. I think Beethoven was very high on the testosterone scale because music is very spatial. And they are drawn to their opposite, high estrogen. I call them directors, and the high estrogen are negotiators. I think Obama is one. I think Clinton is one. As a matter of fact, he has a lot of high estrogen traits. And, you know, I've been wondering when we're going to have our first female president. I think we've had our first female president with Mr. Clinton. But anyway, these people tend to be verbally skilled, contextual, holistic, synthetic thinkers, imaginative, intuitive, good at all kinds of people skills, reading posture, gesture, tone of voice, empathetic, emotionally expressive, and trusting. And so we're all a combination of all of them. So, you know, I mean, for example, my boyfriend and I are both high dopamine. He's a writer too. And I'm high, so that works out very well. I'm very high dopamine. And he's very high testosterone, and I'm very high estrogen. He's got my whole house wired with Alexa and all this stuff. I can barely push the buttons. And so we work very well on both of those categories. He's a tiny little bit higher on the serotonin. He's better at making plans and schedules and things. So it's all these combinations. And when I give a talk to couples therapists, what I will do is, you know, I mean, one of the problems is that we are very heavily psychologized in this society. We know a great deal about psychology. We read a great deal about psychology. But your childhood is only about half of who you are. The rest is who you are biologically. A good 40 to 60% of who you are comes out of your DNA. And you can begin to know. Now, for example, if I'm with a very high testosterone person, I'll get to the point. That's who they are. That's the way they need to hear things. I don't believe any longer in the golden rule, do unto others as you would have done unto yourself. I believe in the platinum rule, do unto others as they would have done unto themselves, and you can reach into their heart and win.
Let's talk about that 40 to 60% then that we have no control over. I mean, that the phrase, you can't choose who you love, that's commonly said, but having read your research, I guess I feel more hopeless than ever. Because,
don't do that. No.
I mean, do I have any control? You know, so my biology and my DNA, I who I'm going to match with is something that's happening in the back of the brain. Am I supposed to sit around and wait for that right category to show up?
Well, I certainly wouldn't. You don't have that much time on the planet.
I'm yelling.
Heavens no. Well, take my questionnaire. And then see if I can be of any use. But there's a lot of people around. You know, love is. You know, I do work with this dating service, Match.com, and as I've said to the president and many other people, these dating services are not dating services. They are introducing services. That's all we do is introduce you. We get you to the right height, the right size, the right shape, the right background, hopefully living within 10 miles or 2 days or whatever. But we can give you all those people, but you have to, Alycin, go out and meet them. The only real algorithm is your own brain. You've got to go out and meet them. We can give you an array of people who we think would be the right thing, but nobody knows your childhood. Anybody who says they're the perfect matchmaker is a fool.
So that's the question, right, is how to use your research and then make it work. So maybe you didn't end up with your personality puzzle piece, but you're in a relationship and things come up and you want to, so how do you use knowing who you are and knowing who they are to make a relationship work?
Well, first of all, it's very... I started a new company with these personality things, and I do a lot of talk in business situations, and the company is called Neurocolor. And the co-founder and I are both high dopamine, and he's very high testosterone, I'm very high estrogen. But we don't have anybody to keep the books. We don't have any accountants. The place is a complete mess. We finally got it under control by hiring somebody who likes to do that. We needed to hire some builders. And that's the same thing with building a team. And when you're in a partnership, if you know who the person is. Now, for example, I recently went to the movies with a friend of mine, and he had some water in his backpack. And I said to him, do you have any water in your backpack? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, we can drink it in the movie house. And he said, no, we can't. You can't bring food or drink into a movie house. You gotta buy it at the concession stand. He's a builder. We bought it at the concession stand.
Okay.
He didn't need to go to a psychiatrist for 10 years to figure out why. There's some things, once you know who this person is, then you can do a workaround. But there's one thing that I want to say about that. We put some, in terms of a happy marriage, I'd like to go into more, but this one thing before I forget it. We put, people kept coming into the lab who were in their 50s and 60s saying, I'm still in love with her. I'm still in love with him. And these people were married an average of 21 years. 4/5 of them had children who were adults. They were still in love, not just loving, but in love with a long-term partner. And so we put them in the machine. We said, okay, nobody believes this, but let's see what happens. And sure enough, the same activity in this ventral tegmental area, a little factory in the base of the brain, basic activity in a brain region linked with attachment. But we then looked at people who scored very high on marital satisfaction. And we found 3 regions in the brain that are linked with long-term real happiness. Now, psychologists will tell you a million things to do to keep a happy partnership. All good. Don't show contempt. Listen actively. Don't threaten divorce. It's all good. But this is what the brain says. These are the 3 brain regions that become active when you are in a long-term happy partnership. A brain region linked with empathy. A brain region linked with controlling your own stress and your own emotions. And a brain region linked with positive illusions, the ability to overlook what you don't like about somebody and focus on what you do. It's a huge brain region linked with what they call negativity bias. And in fact, my boyfriend's actually writing a book on it. It'll come out in January called The Power of Bad. But anyway, there's a huge brain region linked with remembering the negative. And when you think about it from a Darwinian perspective, it's rather adaptive to remember the negative. I mean, if you and I were on the grasslands of Africa 1 million years ago and we were great friends, great. But if there was another girl who couldn't stand us, it'd be adaptive for us to remember that. And so the brain is built to remember the bad. And this brain region becomes less and less active when you are in love. You overlook the bad and focus on the good. It's one of the great things that the brain can add to understanding human happiness.
And it's worth it.
It's worth it. The reason it's worth it is that people who are in good relationships live 7 to 10 years longer. So there you go. That's,
Let's talk about some of those animal correlations that we have with what we've seen in our own mating and courtship, especially the singles bar experiments that you bring up. And I guess I'm wondering if there's a way to exploit your research in order to seduce a partner, because I think someone in the audience might want to know. So you bring up these moments that happen as a stage. It's like a board game on the way to leaving the bar with someone, essentially. And it might start with a glance. A woman will flip her hair back in a way that a bird does as well. We've seen this in the animal kingdom. As you grow closer and talk, maybe there'll be a test touch. And then you come into this dance where you're kind of mirroring each other.
Right.
If you know these things, if you know that's the path to walking out the door with someone, can you manipulate that brain? Can you fake what it would be if we had a connection and create love?
Yeah. Well, we're already doing that, even without knowing the science of it. I mean, we're constantly putting on our best face, wearing our best clothes. We are parading. I mean, we're an animal that parades to find life's greatest prize, which is a mating partner. But the bottom line is, yes, you're talking about the 4-part pickup. And the first thing you do is you set up a territory. and make as much noise as you can, and flip with your hair, and do all that stuff. And then the other person comes into the territory, and then the next thing is talk. And they call it grooming talk. The best thing you can do is ask a question or give a compliment. A joke would be good too, but it's a little harder when you're first meeting somebody. And then the third is touch. And if you casually touch and just touch their arm and they shrink away, you'll never touch again. If they don't do anything, you'll try again. And if they touch back, you'll often move into the fourth part of the pickup, in which you begin to act in synchrony to a beat. As he picks up his beer, you pick up your beer. As he laughs this way, you laugh that way too. Yeah, it's the beginning of a basic courtship. So much comes out of our animal ancestry, you know. In fact, when I do various TV things, I can jump straight from chimpanzees picking somebody up to a singles bar picking somebody up, and why not use these cues? We're constantly we're a walking billboard of who we are, trying to get along in life, and the more you can know about human nature, the more you can use it.
So what about manipulating it a little further? In prairie voles, there's been an experiment where they get injected with vasopressin.
Yeah.
They fall in love, literally a love potion, fall in love and get protective of the next lady prairie vole to walk by. So is that something, like if you are in a marriage or a relationship where you feel them drifting apart, can we sneak some vasopressin into mashed potatoes? I mean, can you create love?
Sure you can, but it's not going to last. The thing with the prairie voles is they altered the genetics of it. They didn't just shoot them in, they altered the genetics so that the animal was now producing regular vasopressin and oxytocin linked with feelings of attachment. Whereas in people, we haven't gotten to the point to alter genetics of somebody. And in fact, a lot of that, the bottom line is, you can feel romantic love, but there's also brain regions linked with memory. I mean, could you ever talk Helen Fisher into falling in love with Donald Trump? I don't think so. It's just not who I am. And anyway, so the bottom line is, you can sniff oxytocin. It's called, I used to have a bottle of this, Liquid Trust. You can buy Liquid Trust, and you can sniff it, and it gives you, you can't smell it. And if you put it all over you, somebody who comes near you might be able to react to it. But the bottom line is, you wake up the following morning and you think of his stupid jokes or his, with this, that, and the next thing you're not in love with anymore. I mean, love is fickle. Nobody gets out of love alive, We all have our problems.
So some of the things that we've acquired in order to fall in love and create these pair bonds are 2 or 4 million years old. I'm going to rush past something that happened much more recently, which was the farming. We got to farming, and we changed greatly how we paired up. And to skim past this, how women treated sex were treated as sexual beings changed. We became, this is where till death do us part, obey thy husband kind of framework came. We're going to rush past all that. I just want you to have that context to modern times, where you've said we've reinvented courtship, not love, that we are doing things differently. But once you fall in love, that brain is still that ancient brain. We're still falling in love in that way. Let's talk about how youth and actually...
Can I stop and answer that a little bit? Yeah. It's a very sophisticated question, and almost nobody ever asked me, and I want to thank you for it.
Okay.
Because everybody says that it's technology that's changing love. First of all, technology can't change love. It's a brain system, like the fear system. It's changing courtship, and that's where you want it to go. But what's really changing love is women moving into the job market. And that's what's, changing it. So for millions of years, we lived in these little hunting and gathering groups. Women were exceedingly powerful. They commuted to work to gather their fruits and vegetables. They came home with 60 to 80% of the evening meal. The double-income family was the rule, and women were regarded as just as sexually and socially powerful as men. We settle down on the farm. Somebody invents the plow. Men's roles as farmers becomes much more important. Now they could move the rocks, fell the trees, plow the land, go off to local markets, and come home with the equivalent of money. And with that, women lost their ancient role as gatherers and providers. And they acquired a new rule of picking, weeding, pruning, preparing the evening meal, and having lots of babies on the farm. And along with that came a huge number of concepts about love. Virginity at marriage for the woman, till death do us part, a woman's place is in the home, a man is the head of the household, etc., etc. In our lifetime, all of that is disappearing. And we're moving forward to the kinds of women that we were 1 million years ago. We are in the middle of a marriage revolution, some demographers call it. Some demographers have said it's as powerful as the Industrial Revolution. We're moving forward to the kinds of marriages, the kinds of women that we were 1 million years ago.
Let's talk about how we are treating marriage in modern love times then, because the way you phrased it is that it's no longer the beginning of a relationship, it's the finale. We're doing this try-on phase.
That's a good word.
And I don't know that is even just youth. As you point out, I think 70-year-olds, 1 in 3 70-year-olds are having one-night stands. And so we're trying things out prior to marriage because we can. We have better protection against STDs. We know how to not get pregnant.
There you go. Right. Good.
So let's talk about your term slow love, and that maybe it's not that that rebel teenager. Maybe this is kind of responsible way to go about love.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So this was in the New York Times that's last week, and it's a new idea of mine. And I wrote an academic article that came out in January, and I called it Slow Love, Courtship in the Digital Age. And it comes from the fact that I do an annual survey with Match called Singles in America. We do not poll the Match members. It's a representative sample of Americans based on the U.S. Census. So I now have data on 40,000 Americans of all ages, all backgrounds, etc. And I kept on seeing, Americans think that the youth are reckless. And I began to realize this isn't reckless, this is caution. Over 50% of singles in America today have had a one-night stand. Over 50% have had friends with benefits. Over 50% have lived with somebody long-term before they wed. And it began to occur to me that what we're really seeing is an extension of the pre-commitment stage. That these days, singles want to know everything about a person before they tie the knot. And in fact, 34% of singles will have sex with somebody before the first date. Now, in the papers, they say this is crazy, but the first date has acquired new meaning. The first date is now really on the way to a commitment. So what they'll do is they start out as just friends, we're just friends. Then they move into friends with benefits, don't tell anybody about it. Then they slowly move out and have their official first date, which is the beginning, actually, of the relationship. And then they slowly move in together, and then they finally marry. So it began to occur to me with the extension of this pre-commitment stage, long pre-commitment stage, that by the time you walk down the aisle, you not only know who you are and what you want, but you know who you got, and you think you want and can keep who you've got. So I did a study of 1,100 married people, and I asked them a lot of questions. But one of the questions was, would you remarry the person that you're currently married to? What percentage would you say? Just scream it out. 70? 30? 40? 81%. And I then looked at, we always hear about the ones that are unhappy. And I looked at the demographic yearbooks through the United Nations from 1947 to 2011. And the later you marry, the more likely you are to remain married. And there's a lot of other data on this now. And what these millennials are doing, they're not in a rush. As you said, where marriage used to be the beginning of a relationship, now it's the finale.
And then years of love from then. We find that true love. We didn't get to adultery. Maybe some questions will come up during the audience portion. I want to sneak in a couple of questions about you because I'm afraid those won't come up during the audience question. First of all, you are a twin, as you mentioned, and did that inform your career? Is that why you were doing this?
That's an interesting question. I don't have a sexy answer, but people ask me, why do I study love?
Yeah.
And I basically say, I don't have a sexy answer. The answer is that I am an identical twin. And even as a small child, they always ask twins the same questions. Do you like the same food? Do you have the same friends? Do you think alike? I thought that one was a weird one when I was a kid. Now I understand it. But and then I got into graduate school in Boulder, and they believed when I was in graduate school that all behavior was learned. And I kept on thinking to myself, this isn't true. I know that there's genetics to behavior. And I thought to myself in writing the PhD dissertation, if there's any part of human behavior that must have a genetic component, it must be our reproductive strategy. Because if you, Alycin, have 4 children and you, Helen, have no children, you live on and I die out. So whatever you did to get that boy and have those babies is going to be selected for. And so I began studying first why we bother to pair up at all. I mean, 97% of mammals do not pair up to rear their young. It's astonishing that we bother at all, which we do over and over again. And then I moved into why do we form these pair bonds? And that led me to studying these 3 brain systems: sex drive, romance, and feelings of deep attachment.
This isn't a question. This is just for those of you in the audience who want to feel more connected to Helen. She has both married and divorced a man from Aspen.
He's here. Oh, I see him. I think I see him.
So
is that you?
There's a lot in the room who can relate.
He's not moving. I haven't seen him in 30 years.
I like your term special friend when you talk about chimpanzees or gorillas. I know you have a special friend in the audience tonight too. John's here, but how hard is it to date you when you're dating though? You sit down and you order your appetizer and you say, "I'm a love expert." What does he do next?
Most of them are. John's not a narcissist, but many of the others were, so they didn't care. I didn't care either, so. We'd have to ask John how he feels about that. Or Joe.
So right before we open it up to questioning, let me get back to that, the 3 types of love that we're talking about. Right. And they're kind of like this lust, romantic love, attachment. And you're not using phases. They're not in order. Right. But there's these 3 different kind of fires you can stoke. What would be the kiln for each one of those fires? What leads to those different, not phases?
I don't really study the sex drive. I would imagine it has a great deal to do with your childhood. We build as small children what I call your love map. It's an unconscious and conscious list of what you're looking for in a partner. And then timing has to be right. Proximity has to be right. In my case, I think lighting would work. And when that person walks in front of you and the timing is right, you're ready to fall in love. You're ready to have sex with somebody and they fit within, and they begin to flirt with you, and you can trigger the sex drive. With romantic love, you really build a love map. And when you're ready to fall in love, somebody, once again, who fits within what you're looking for in a partner comes into your ken, and you can and trigger that. By the way, the brain circuitry for romantic love can be triggered instantly. Over 50% of singles believe that love at first sight exists. And almost 50% have had it happen. And it's actually rather easy to explain because it's a basic brain system. It can be triggered instantly. What can't be triggered instantly is the last brain system of attachment. That grows. And when we put our first group of people, 17 of them, into the machine, we ended up studying those that were in love for the first 8 months had been in love for about 8 months, as opposed to those who were in love for 8 to 17 months. And we could see in the brain activity in a certain brain region linked with attachment that grows. So sex drive can be triggered instantly, romantic love can be triggered instantly, and attachment takes time.
I think we have 2 mic runners that I will point out. If any of you have questions, we'd ask that you just use the microphone. I know it's so tempting to sit down and have the birds and the bees talk and be like, how do you know when it's date? How do you know if he likes me? Let's make them very concise questions with directed towards Helen. And we have one right up here. Thank you.
If you are in a long and really loving, totally in love relationship for quite a long time, and maybe there's a death or something happens and a divorce happens, Is the second love that might evolve in your life the same? Is there something different that goes on in the brain?
Probably the brain system is exactly the same. It's like the fear system or the anger system. If you're scared, you're going to be scared when you're 2.5. You're going to be scared when you're 92.5. In the same way, if you're in love, by the way, the youngest person I ever found that was in love was age 2.5. Yeah, not sex. Romantic love. Every time a particular little girl would come over to his house, he'd just go and sit next to her and stroke her hair. And then he'd be depressed for about a couple hours. So the bottom line is yes. Yeah, it's a little longer as you get older.
Go.
Is there any difference between infatuation and that moment of starting love? And if there is, could you expand on it, on the hormonal side and whatever else there is?
It's very interesting that word infatuation has evolved into a meaning. When I look up the word infatuation in the dictionary, it's exactly the same traits as the traits of romantic love. We've come to think that this is something that is, almost like a crush. But when you actually look in the dictionary at what infatuation, how they describe it, it is exactly the same traits of romantic love, which I could go into if you want.
Do we have more questions? On the left here.
I think I read something about your feelings about monogamy, and you mentioned that, I don't remember what the statistic, 90-some% of other mammals don't pair up.
Right.
So what is this about humans that pair up?
Yeah.
Is it really a natural thing, or is it something we've made up?
Okay, so mono means one and gamy means spouse. So scientists do not regard monogamy as fidelity. They call it pairing up, exactly the way you've used it properly. And that was my PhD dissertation. Why do we bother to pair up at all? And here's the hypothesis. We were in the trees began to disappear. We had to get down out of the trees in Africa. We began to stand up on 2 feet instead of 4 in order to carry sticks and stones to protect ourselves, and food that we could then race back to the trees and eat unmolested by predators. And with the beginning of carrying came walking. And suddenly females who used to carry their baby on their back, chimpanzees carry their babies on their back, standing up on 2 feet, you got to hold the baby in your arms. How are you going to carry the equivalent of a 20-pound bowling ball for about 2 or so years and still provide for yourself food and protection? And so I think we went over what I call a monogamy threshold, a tremendous need for ancestral females about 4 million years ago to have a partner to help them at least through the infancy of a single child, about 4 years. And that how could a male have a harem of females like many animals do? How could he protect those females from other males or other animals? But it could be, from a Darwinian perspective, adaptive for him to care and feed one. So we evolved in the brain these brain systems for romantic love and feelings of long-term attachment that we still have today. The difference is we seem to be largely serially monogamous. We tend to have a series of partnerships. And I wondered why do we divorce after spending so much time getting married, building a home, getting jobs, building a house, having babies? Why do we then divorce? And so I looked at the demographic yearbooks of the United Nations. And as it turns out, if you're going to divorce, you tend to divorce during and around the 4th year of marriage. And it began to occur to me that maybe for millions of years, it took one man and one woman about 4 years to raise a single child through infancy. Once that child could be cared for by a 7-year-old and a 10-year-old and other people in the band, the pair bond could break up. They didn't always, but they could. And the Darwinian adaptive nature of that would be, if you have children by more than one partner, you're creating more genetic variety in your young, leaving the human animal with a tremendous desire to fall in love and form a pair bond, a restlessness in long relationships, a tendency to divorce, and a tendency then to move on to another partner. And what's so interesting about millennials today is they're having all those series of partnerships before they wed, in their 20s, and even in their teens. And so this is one of the reasons that I think that we may be heading towards more stable marriages.
So evolutionarily, biologically, it makes sense to spread your DNA. At this point, there's enough humans on Earth. We don't have to survive 4D per parent pair to keep our species going. This leads to the adultery question as well. It is biologically, it makes sense, especially for a male, right? If he can go out and impregnate many, many females of any species, all species do this, then that DNA is more likely to go on. But at this point,
yeah, but if he 4 million years ago, if he impregnated a woman and then left her, that baby was likely to die. So there was a selection in men as well as women for deep feelings of attachment.
I have a follow-up to that as well. So we no longer consciously, I mean, it wasn't probably never conscious, but we don't need that DNA to spread. I don't care if Alycin Bektesh DNA keeps going. So do you wrestle with, yes, biologically it makes sense, but there's got to be an ethical path too. Ethically, does adultery work?
So I'm not in the how-to business. I'm in the how-come business. And I sort of feel that we have to make that each decision for ourselves. But in the how-come business, there certainly are explanations for why we are not only form pair bonds, but are also adulterous. And the main one is that if a man in a hunting and gathering society had a wife and 2 children and went down the way and had another child with somebody else, he would send more DNA into his future. If a woman had extra partnerships and ended up having an extra child, she would also create more genetic variety in her young. But she would also get these other boys to maybe come around and, as an insurance policy if her man, slipped and fell or got eaten by a lion. So bottom line is adultery's had its purposes through evolution. And what's interesting about today is that we are at a time in human evolution where we've always been measuring to what degree do I want commitment and to what degree do I want autonomy. And I think we all wrestle with that. And what's interesting is there's a new term called LAT, living apart together. And it's the concept of having separate homes, spending some nights with your girlfriends or whatever, not sleeping around, and seeing your partner not quite as often. What's beautiful about today is that we can build the kind of partnerships that we want. It's no longer till death do us part, but we can do that. We can live apart together. Some people do polyamory. Some people are gay. Some people are queer or trans or whatever it is. We have now in our modern world tremendous opportunities to find and keep the love we want.
Are there more audience questions? You see her in the back, thanks.
Hi there. My friend Lionel Tiger, the anthropologist, suggests that women always determine the outcome of the encounter. What would you say?
He's a very good friend of mine. He was in the Department of Anthropology. We still see each other all the time. Oh, I don't agree with it. There's an awful lot of men who leave women.
Experiment in which there were women at a bar, and men would try and pick them up. If the woman reached out and touched the man, then it would evolve and the guy would say, "Isn't she great?" But if she didn't, the guys would leave and say, "Oh, I really didn't like her very much."
Well, I tell you, I think that men actually are the new feminists. I'm about to come out with a whole press release on that very issue. What's interesting is women in business today want absolute equality, and we're all for that. But in courtship, they play a different mating game. 91% of men today would be perfectly happy if a woman came up and asked them for their phone number, if a woman invited them out, if a woman was the first person to reach out the following day after a good date, if the woman was the first to invite them to bed, but women don't do it. Actually, over 85% of men in America today would be perfectly happy if women played a more obvious role in courtship. We don't do that. We're not. I wonder if we're ever going to do that. It's an interesting puzzle for me personally. How much is that just genetic? How much do we want to sit around and flip our hair and wait for him to come by? and how much do we want to get out there and make the first move. What's interesting is when I ask women whether they've ever made the first move, less than 25% have ever asked a man out, ever initiated the first kiss, ever called the following morning, et cetera, et cetera. But 37% of millennials are doing it. Millennials are rewriting our courtship rules in some very sophisticated ways.
Sure, back there.
I think you differentiated between love and a crush. What is that difference?
Well, I don't really study crushes, but my guess is that a crush is, everybody in the audience might know more than I do. A crush is, I think of a crush as a teenager for a rock star. I mean, they're just practicing, and it's very safe. They're not going to sleep with a rock star. He's never going to text her or call her. But she gets to play with this feeling of romance without any of the terror or the anxiety or the problems that come with a first date. So very often I think people can just have a crush on somebody and not go anywhere with it, just think that this is a really dandy guy or wonderful girl. So that would be my definition, but I really don't study crushes. It's probably a form of romantic love that's relatively superficial and doesn't go very far and has its purposes of practicing.
I think we have time for two more. In the middle here. Thank you.
The concept of wanting what you can't have. Is there any truth to that in playing the game of courting?
I coined a term called frustration attraction. And when you can't get it, you want it more.
Is that biological?
Yes, it's biological. And I know what's happening in the brain. It's a little bit like when you decide, at 4 o'clock I'm going to go down to the vending machine and get a chocolate bar. It has to be 4 o'clock. The vending machine is broken. You want it even more. You just want that, And so I think it's millions of years ago, it was an adaptive mechanism to make you keep trying to win the person. Don't forget, you're fighting for life's greatest prize, a mating partner. So we've got all kinds of adaptive mechanisms like jealousy, like envy, like abandonment, rage. We haven't talked about rejection. And this frustration, attraction, maybe once again, we know what's happening in the brain. The dopamine system becomes more active when you can't get what you want. And it makes you try harder. What dopamine does is gives you energy, focus, and motivation to win that perfect love.
And biologically, on the other side, is there something where it is more attractive that someone's tried a couple times, that they brought bigger chunks of a tiger to your den over and over again? Is there a biological reason for that to work?
Yes, absolutely. Women like men who provide. They always have. They always will. For millions of years. It's so interesting because a friend once said this to me. I've never written it up, but if I had to boil it down to one thing, I think women want to be cherished and men want to be needed. And I think it's over 4 million years old.
Do we have one more here? Do we want to end on that? One more down here, thank you.
Well, your title was Love and Lust, but I don't think you talked much about lust and how that interacts with love
wonderful.
Or separates.
Oh, that's terrific. How does lust interact with love? It's very interesting because when you go to bed with somebody, first of all, I don't think there's anything called casual sex. Unless you're so drunk you can't remember it, there's nothing. Casual sex is not casual. Because when you go to bed with somebody, any stimulation of the genitals will drive up the dopamine system and can push you over the threshold into falling in love. And with orgasm, there's a real flood of oxytocin and vasopressin linked with feelings of attachment. And I asked in this annual study with Match.com, have you ever gone to bed with somebody, just to go to bed with them and no intention of falling in love? Have you ever gone to bed with somebody, just a one-night hookup, and fallen madly in love with them? And 35% of people said yes. And this is one of the reasons I think that a lot of people I think that people these days, they go to bed with somebody very rapidly. It could be for one of two reasons. Either it's a sex interview. They want to see if it's worth going out to dinner with them, if it costs $200. You learn a lot between the sheets, not just how he makes love, but is he patient? Is he kind? Can he listen? Does he have a sense of humor? That kind of thing. But So I think people, or they're going to bed with somebody to trigger. They don't know it, but they like somebody, and they go to bed with them in order to hope that this will trigger romantic love in that person or deep feelings of attachment. So they're all connected, romantic, but they're not always connected. This is the problem. You can lie in bed at night and feel deep attachment to one person and then swing into feelings of wild romantic love for somebody else, and then swing into feelings of the sex drive for somebody you hardly know. So, but we got a huge cortex with which we make decisions. We're an animal that makes decisions. We can control our sex life. Yeah. Oh, I just wanted to say two things. First of all, I generally make a speech, and this time it's a wonderful thank you, Alycin. This personality questionnaire that I have created, that's been taken by 14 million people in 40 countries, it generally costs $300. I didn't even mention this to you or to our sponsors, but it generally costs $300 to take the questionnaire. But I'd like to give it to you today as a gift. But this is the URL.
Can you see
So
it?
what I'm going to have to do is just pass these, there's 4 of them, just pass it around, and just take a picture of it if you want to. Don't bother if you don't need to. Maybe I'll keep one and I'll leave it outside, and I'll take one and. Yes, I can say it too.
We'll do that in just a moment.
Yeah. So the bottom line is, I'll put it right out there, and you can take a picture of it outside if you don't get to it here. But I will say it to you here. But let me tell you, first of all, you'll only get the questionnaire. It's not going to explain it to you. If you want it explained to you, just go to my website, theanatomyoflove.com. Theanatomyoflove.com. But here's the URL, and then I want to tell you one more thing. It's https, 2 slashes to the right, and then tinyurl.com. So tinyurl.com, slash to the right, Helen Fisher, 2019. You only have till tomorrow night at midnight to take this.
A real Cinderella
Reason
story.
being is that it is very expensive, and we don't want it drifting around the world. It's central to our company. And I just want to say one thing about love, very last thing
Please.
about love. Times change. Courtship is changing. Courtship has always changed. But romantic love is going to be with us until the end of time. This brain system is adaptive, it's primordial, and it's eternal. Thank you.